The handcuffs clicked shut before Daniel Reyes could even finish saying his daughter's name. Mia. Mia, stay with Mrs. Fenwick, baby. It's okay. Daddy will be right back. His voice cracked on the last word as two officers pulled his arms behind him, the cold metal biting into his wrists. Across the small front yard, his 8-year-old daughter stood frozen on the porch step in her unicorn pajamas. Her school backpack still slung over one shoulder because they'd been about to leave for the morning drop-off. Her eyes were huge, glassy, uncomprehending. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Fenwick, rushed out in her robe and gathered the girl against her hip, but Mia didn't cry. She just stared at her father being walked toward a squad car like something in a dream she couldn't wake up from. Daniel Reyes, you're under arrest for the armed robbery of First Meridian Bank on Colfax Avenue, the lead officer, a broad-shouldered man named Detective Coleman, said flatly. Reciting the rest of the rights Daniel could no longer hear over the roaring in his ears. There has to be a mistake, Daniel said, his voice steady even as his heart slammed against his ribs. I was here. I was making breakfast. Ask my daughter. Ask the security camera on my porch. I have a camera. It records everything. You can explain it downtown, Coleman said, guiding him into the back seat. As the car pulled away, Daniel twisted to look through the rear window. Mia had finally broken from Mrs. Fenwick's arms and was running down the driveway after the car, her small legs pumping, her backpack bouncing against her spine, screaming a word that broke something loose and permanent in Daniel's chest. Daddy. If you've ever watched someone you love disappear into a system that doesn't know them, doesn't care about them, only sees a case number and a matching description, then you already know the particular terror that settled into Daniel Reyes that morning. And if this story moves you even a little, I hope you'll stay with it to the end. And if you believe in second chances and the truth eventually finding its way to the light, hit that like button and subscribe because there's a lot more of this journey ahead. Daniel Reyes was 34 years old, a construction site foreman with calloused hands and a gentle voice, the kind of man who coached Mia's soccer team on Saturdays, even though he didn't know a soccer ball from a coconut when he'd first signed up 2 years earlier. His wife, Elena, had died of an aggressive illness when Mia was 5, and in the 3 years since, Daniel had rebuilt his entire life around one goal, making sure his daughter never doubted, for even a single day, that she was loved and safe. He packed her lunch every morning with a little note tucked inside, sometimes a joke, sometimes just, I love you, Misha. And he never once, not on the hardest nights when grief pressed down on his chest like a stone, let her see him fall apart. The neighborhood knew him as the dad who fixed everyone's fences for free, who kept a folding chair by his mailbox so he could sit and talk to whoever passed, who never missed a single school assembly no matter how tired the job site left him. Now he sat in an interrogation room under fluorescent light, so harsh it made his eyes water, across from Detective Sarah Coleman, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and the exhausted patience of someone who had seen 100 men swear they were innocent. Walk me through your morning, she said, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed grainy security footage of a man in a gray hooded jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, jumping the counter at First Meridian Bank with a gun in his hand. The build was similar to Daniel's. The skin tone at that distance and resolution could have belonged to 100 different men in the neighborhood. That's not me, Daniel said. I was home. I made pancakes. I have security footage. My porch camera runs 24/7, it's cloud-backed. You can pull it right now. We're looking into it, Coleman said, though her tone suggested she'd heard that line more times than she could count. Your car, though, a gray Honda Civic, matches a vehicle seen leaving the scene, and a witness identified a man, matching your description, running 2 blocks from the bank. There have to be 1,000 gray Civics in this city. There are 112 registered within a 5-mile radius, Coleman said, and something in the precision of her answer told Daniel she'd actually checked, that she wasn't simply repeating a hunch. It was the first small crack of relief he felt all day. She was thorough, at least, even if thoroughness was currently crushing him. Please, Daniel said, leaning forward, chains rattling softly against the table edge. I have a daughter. She's 8. Her mother passed 3 years ago, and I am all she has in this world. Whatever this case needs from me, I will give it. But you have to at least look at that footage before this goes any further. Please. Coleman studied him for a long moment, the kind of look that had, over 15 years on the force, learned to separate performance from genuine fear. Something about the way his voice broke on the word daughter stayed with her longer than she expected. The hours that followed blurred together. A public defender named Marcus Webb, young and overworked but sincere, met with Daniel for 11 rushed minutes in a cramped side room that smelled of old coffee, and told him bail would likely be set high given the armed nature of the charge. Daniel's stomach dropped through the floor. He thought of his mortgage, of Mia's school pickup schedule, of the soccer team he coached, of every ordinary thread of his life that this one morning was now unraveling. "My daughter," he said, gripping the edge of the table. "She just watched them arrest me. She doesn't have anyone else. Elena's gone. My mother's in Arizona. Please, I need you to check that footage, please." Marcus promised he'd file for an emergency review of the camera evidence, scribbling notes on a legal pad already crowded with a dozen other clients' names. And Daniel understood, with a sinking heart, that his case was one of many on a very long list. But Marcus also paused at the door before leaving, turned back and said quietly, "For what it's worth, Mr. Reyes, I believe you. I've been doing this 6 years and I know what a lie sounds like. This isn't it." It wasn't much, but in that gray little room it felt like the only solid ground Daniel had left to stand on. The wheels of the system moved slower than a father's panic ever could. That first night in a holding cell, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat with his back against cinder block, replaying the sound of his daughter's voice screaming his name, and made himself a promise: no matter what happened, no matter how long this took, he would find a way back to her, and he would never let this be the story that defined either of their lives. He thought about Elena, about the last thing she'd whispered to him in the hospital. "Take care of our girl. Make sure she always knows she's safe." And he pressed his forehead against his knees and silently swore to her, wherever she was, that he wouldn't break that promise. Not now. Not like this. 3 miles away, Mia sat at Mrs. Fenwick's kitchen table, untouched cereal going soft in the bowl in front of her. Mrs. Fenwick, a widow in her 70s who had lived next door since before Mia was born, kept up a stream of gentle chatter, trying anything to coax a response. Finally, Mia looked up, her voice very small. "Is my daddy a bad guy?" Mrs. Fenwick's heart cracked clean in half. "No, sweetheart," she said, kneeling down to Mia's eye level. "Your daddy is one of the best men I have ever known. Sometimes grown-up mistakes happen, and good people get caught in them. But mistakes get fixed, and I am going to help fix this one, I promise you that." She meant it. That afternoon, while Mia napped fitfully on the living room couch, one arm curled protectively around the stuffed rabbit her mother had given her as a baby, Mrs. Fenwick pulled up the porch camera app on the tablet Daniel had once set up for her, so she could check on her own front step. She'd forgotten he had also linked a secondary viewing account to her device months earlier, back when he'd worried about a string of package thefts on the block. Her hands trembled as she scrolled backward through the footage time-stamped that very morning. There he was, 7:14 a.m., Daniel Reyes in a faded green flannel, flipping pancakes at the stove visible through the kitchen window. Mia at the table swinging her feet, both of them completely, ordinarily, unmistakably present at home, at the exact same minute the robbery report listed as the time of the crime. 12 minutes drive across town. Mrs. Fenwick called Marcus Webb's office 6 times before someone picked up. And when they finally did, her voice shook so badly she had to say it twice before the receptionist understood. "I have the proof. I have the footage. Please, someone has to look at this today." Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Coleman was not satisfied. Something about the case nagged at her in the particular way loose threads always had. Ever since she was a rookie who'd learned the hard way that an eyewitness under stress could misidentify a stranger with total, sincere confidence. She pulled the case file home that night, spreading photographs across her kitchen table long after her own kids had gone to bed. The witness, a bank teller named Priya Anand, had described the suspect as a man, medium build, gray jacket, maybe 5'10". That description, Coleman realized as she stared at it, could match roughly a third of the men within a 2-mile radius of the bank. Eyewitness memory under the adrenaline of an armed robbery was notoriously unreliable. She'd sat through the trainings, she'd seen the studies, and yet the department's culture pushed for fast closures, and Daniel Reyes's arrest had closed the case with satisfying speed. Too much speed, she now suspected. She pulled traffic camera footage from 4 intersections near the bank. It took her past midnight, cross-referencing timestamps. Before she found it, a gray Honda Civic, yes, but with a license plate that did not match Daniel's. Caught on camera 2 blocks from First Meridian at 7:09 a.m., 5 minutes before the robbery, and 11 minutes before Daniel Reyes, according to his porch camera, was still standing at his own stove. She sat back in her chair, rubbed her tired eyes, and allowed herself one quiet, satisfied breath. There it was. The thread she'd been pulling on finally had something real at the end of it. The next morning, Coleman arrived at the precinct earlier than usual, coffee in hand, and pulled every scrap of footage she could find of the actual getaway vehicle. By 9 a.m. she had a partial plate. By 10, a full registration. The car belonged to a 36-year-old man named Raymond Dawson, a former bank employee who had been terminated from First Meridian 8 months earlier for falsifying transaction records. A man who, as it turned out, bore a passing resemblance to Daniel Reyes at a glance and grainy resolution, but who, unlike Daniel, had a documented grudge against the very bank he'd allegedly robbed, and a paper trail of angry emails to his former manager to prove it. Coleman brought the traffic footage, the plate match, and Dawson's termination file to her captain, laying it all out with the same meticulousness that had made her a good detective for 15 years, even when the department's momentum ran against her. "We have the wrong man in custody," she said, sliding the folder across the desk. "I need eyes on Raymond Dawson today, and I need Daniel Reyes released before this goes any further. There's an 8-year-old girl out there who watched her father get put in the back of a squad car for a crime he didn't commit. Every hour we wait is an hour we don't get back for that family." Her captain, to his credit, didn't argue. He picked up the phone before she'd even finished the sentence. It still took hours, paperwork, a judge's signature, a scramble to locate Dawson before he could disappear. But by 4 p.m. that same day, officers located Raymond Dawson at a motel 40 minutes outside the city. The stolen cash from First Meridian still zipped inside a gym bag under the bed, along with the gray hooded jacket and baseball cap from the security footage. He didn't even try to run. He simply looked up when the door opened and said, with something between exhaustion and relief, "Took you all long enough. At the precinct?" Detective Coleman walked into the small holding area herself instead of sending an officer. Daniel looked up from where he sat, unshaven now, his eyes hollow with 2 sleepless nights, his hands still shaking faintly from a combination of hunger and fear he'd been fighting to hide. "Mr. Reyes," she said, and something in her voice, unsteadier now, almost gentle, made him sit up straight. "We found the man who actually robbed First Meridian Bank. Your porch camera, the traffic footage, the vehicle registration, it all checks out. You're free to go, and I owe you an apology, a real one, not the kind we're trained to give." Daniel didn't trust himself to speak at first. He just sat there, hands over his face, his shoulders shaking with something that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite laughing. Just 3 days of terror finally breaking loose. "Thank you," he finally managed, his voice raw. "Thank you for not stopping at the easy answer." "That's supposed to be the job," Coleman said quietly. "I'm sorry it took this long to actually do it." "My daughter," he said. "I need to see my daughter." Coleman drove him herself. It wasn't procedure, but she didn't care. Something about this case had gotten under her skin in a way few had in 15 years, and she needed, to see it through to the doorstep. When the car pulled up outside the small blue house, Mia was sitting on the porch steps exactly where Daniel had last seen her, as though some part of her had been waiting there for 3 straight days, refusing to believe anywhere else was worth being. She saw him get out of the car and she didn't run this time. She stood frozen for one long second, like she needed to be sure her eyes weren't lying to her. And then she was moving, sprinting down the walkway, and Daniel dropped to his knees on the pavement and caught her as she launched herself into his arms. "Daddy, Daddy, you came back, she sobbed into his shoulder, her small fists gripping fistfuls of his shirt like she was afraid the world might try to take him again. "I told you I would, Misha," he whispered into her hair, his own tears finally falling freely, right there on the sidewalk in front of God and Mrs. Fenwick and Detective Sarah Coleman, none of whom looked away, none of whom seemed to think a grown man crying on his knees was anything but exactly right. "I promised you, and I meant it." Mrs. Fenwick stood on the porch with both hands pressed over her mouth, tears streaming freely down her weathered face, murmuring thank you to no one and everyone at once. Coleman stayed by her car a respectful distance away, giving them the moment, though she found herself blinking hard against her own unexpected tears. In the weeks that followed, the department issued a formal apology and a settlement that Daniel used, in part to set up a small college fund for Mia and, in part, to help Mrs. Fenwick with the home repairs she'd been putting off for years out of her fixed income. He also, quietly and without telling anyone, paid for 6 months of Marcus Webb's office coffee machine subscription, a small joke between the two men that had grown into an unlikely friendship. Detective Coleman, whose dogged insistence on double-checking a case everyone else considered closed had ultimately saved an innocent man from years in prison, became something unexpected in Daniel's life. Not a friend exactly, not yet, but someone he trusted. Someone he brought Mia to meet properly one Saturday afternoon at the community soccer field, where Coleman awkwardly but genuinely cheered from the sidelines as Mia scored her first goal of the season. Raymond Dawson pleaded guilty and was sentenced for the robbery, and the false eyewitness identification that had nearly cost Daniel everything became, quietly, the subject of a new training module Coleman helped design for the department, aimed at slowing officers down before an arrest, at asking one more question before closing a case with satisfying speed instead of certain accuracy. She presented it herself to a room full of skeptical junior officers, and she opened with one sentence that silenced the room. I almost sent an innocent father to prison because it was faster to believe the easy story than to check the hard truth. But none of that mattered nearly as much. In the end, as one small ordinary Tuesday morning 3 months later, when Daniel stood at the stove flipping pancakes and Mia sat at the table swinging her feet, the porch camera, recording nothing more dramatic than golden early light spilling across the kitchen floor, Mia looked up at her father, syrup on her chin, and asked in the easy, unburdened way children ask questions when they've finally stopped being afraid, "Can we invite Detective Coleman for pancakes on Saturday?" Daniel smiled, flipped another pancake, and felt for the first time in months that the ground beneath his family was solid again. "Yeah, baby," he said. "I think we can do that." That Saturday, Detective Coleman arrived at 9 sharp, slightly awkward in jeans and a college sweatshirt instead of her usual blazer, holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers she'd debated buying for 20 minutes, in the checkout line because she wasn't sure what the etiquette was for the family you'd once nearly destroyed with a mistaken arrest. Mia answered the door before Daniel could, already in her soccer jersey, and instead of shaking Coleman's hand the way adults do, she simply wrapped both arms around the detective's waist in a hug that lasted a beat longer than either of them expected. "Thank you for finding out my daddy was innocent," Mia said matter-of-factly, in the blunt, disarming way only children manage, and Coleman had to look up at the porch ceiling for a moment to keep her composure. Over pancakes, the three of them talked about nothing important. Soccer standings, a leaky faucet Daniel had fixed for a neighbor, whether syrup or honey was objectively superior, a debate Mia argued with the fierce conviction of an 8-year-old, certain of very little else in the world, but entirely certain about this. It wasn't closure, exactly. Closure implied an ending, a door shutting cleanly behind you. This was something quieter and more durable. The slow, ordinary work of trust being rebuilt one Saturday at a time, in a kitchen that smelled like batter and coffee instead of fear. Marcus Webb stopped by later that afternoon too, official business long since concluded, just to see how the family he'd fought for was doing. He watched Daniel toss a soccer ball back and forth with Mia in the front yard, watched Mrs. Fenwick totter out onto her own porch to wave, watched Coleman laugh at something Mia said with her head thrown all the way back, and he thought, not for the first time in his exhausting, underpaid, occasionally heartbreaking career, that this exact unremarkable Saturday afternoon was the entire reason the job was worth doing, even on the days it felt impossible, because sometimes the truth takes its time. Sometimes it takes a stranger's stubborn refusal to let a case close too easily, a neighbor's trembling hand scrolling through camera footage at midnight, a young lawyer's promise kept past midnight, a father's unbroken promise made through the back window of a police car, and sometimes against every terrifying odd, the truth arrives exactly when a family needs it most, not to erase what was taken, but to give it all back, pancake by pancake, Saturday by Saturday, one ordinary morning at a time.